Sarah Martinez had always believed that her hands were meant to heal, not to harm. Growing up in a small town in Texas, she watched her grandmother tend to neighbors with herbal remedies and gentle care. That image of healing stayed with her through medical school, through her residency, and finally into her decision to join the military as a field medic. The deployment to Afghanistan came when she was 28, already experienced in emergency medicine, but completely unprepared for the reality of war. Her unit, Bravo Company, was stationed at Forward Operating Base Chapman, a dusty outpost in the mountains near the Pakistan border. The base housed 200 soldiers, and Sarah was one of only 3 medics responsible for their medical care. From her first day, Sarah threw herself into her work with the dedication that had carried her through medical school. She set up the medical bay with military precision, organizing supplies and equipment so she could find anything in the dark. Her fellow soldiers quickly learned to trust her steady hands and calm demeanor. Whether it was treating a sprained ankle from a training exercise or dealing with more serious injuries from patrol encounters, Sarah handled everything with the same focused professionalism. The other soldiers began calling her Doc with genuine affection. She treated their homesickness with late-night conversations, their fear with reassuring words, and their physical ailments with skill that often amazed even the seasoned veterans. Sarah found purpose in this role. Every bandage she applied, every infection she prevented, every soldier she sent back to duty healthy felt like a small victory against the chaos of war. Lieutenant Colonel James, the base commander, respected Sarah's work but worried about her idealism. He had seen too many good people broken by the realities of combat. During their weekly medical briefings, he often reminded her that in this environment, everyone needed to be prepared for anything. Sarah would nod politely, but privately she believed her role was clear. She was there to save lives, not take them. The base operated on a routine that became comfortable over the months. Patrols would go out, sometimes encountering small skirmishes, and return with minor injuries that Sarah could easily handle. The most serious case she had dealt with was a soldier who stepped on an improvised explosive device and lost 2 fingers. Even that trauma, while devastating for the soldier, fell within her training and experience. Sarah spent her free time reading medical journals and writing letters home to her family. She told them about the beautiful mountain sunrises and the camaraderie among the troops, but she rarely mentioned the constant underlying tension or the way everyone's eyes never quite relaxed, always scanning for threats. She preferred to focus on the positive aspects of her service. Her closest friend on the base was Sergeant Mike, a demolitions expert who had been deployed twice before. Mike often teased Sarah about her optimistic outlook, but he also protected it in small ways. He would distract her when the more hardened soldiers shared their darker stories, and he made sure she got first choice of care packages from home. Mike understood that Sarah's belief in healing was what made her so good at her job. The medical bay became a sanctuary of sorts for many soldiers. They would stop by not just for treatment, but for the sense of normalcy that Sarah provided. She kept the space clean and organized, with a small radio playing soft music when possible. Photos of home decorated one wall, and she encouraged soldiers to add their own pictures to the collection. The bay represented hope and healing in a place where both were often in short supply. As summer turned to fall, intelligence reports suggested increased enemy activity in their sector. Patrol schedules became more frequent and routes more unpredictable. Sarah noticed the change in the soldiers' demeanor. They moved with greater urgency, checked their weapons more often, and their conversations became more subdued. Still, she focused on her medical duties, trusting that others would handle the security concerns. One evening in October, Sarah was updating medical records when Sergeant stopped by the medical bay. He seemed more serious than usual, sitting down across from her makeshift desk. He asked if she had ever thought about what she would do if the base came under serious attack. Sarah laughed and reminded him that she was a medic, not a soldier. Her job was to treat the wounded, not create them. Mike's expression remained grave as he explained that intelligence suggested their base might become a target for a major assault. He respected her commitment to healing, but he wanted her to understand that in a real firefight, medical training alone might not be enough to keep her or her patients alive. Sarah appreciated his concern, but maintained her position that her medical oath and training were her primary responsibilities. That conversation planted a small seed of unease in Sarah's mind, though she pushed it aside. She had trained for medical emergencies, triage situations, and mass casualty events. Her role in any crisis would be to provide medical care while others handled the fighting. The idea that she might need to pick up a weapon seemed not just unlikely, but contrary to everything she believed about her purpose as a healer. The base commander began implementing additional security measures and emergency protocols. During the briefings, Sarah paid attention to the medical aspects, but tuned out most of the combat discussions. She trusted her fellow soldiers to handle threats, while she focused on keeping everyone healthy and treating any injuries that resulted from their defensive actions. As October progressed, the mood on the base grew more tense. Patrols reported increased surveillance from local villagers who had previously been friendly. Supply convoys required larger escorts, and the frequency of radio check-ins increased. Sarah noticed these changes but remained focused on her medical duties, treating the stress-related ailments that began appearing more frequently among the troops. The night before everything changed, Sarah wrote in her journal about her commitment to healing and her gratitude for the opportunity to serve in a medical capacity. She wrote about the satisfaction of knowing that her presence made the base safer for everyone, not through violence, but through her ability to treat injuries and illness. She had no way of knowing that within 24 hours, everything she believed about her role would be challenged in ways she could never have imagined. The attack began at 4:47 a.m. with the distinctive whistle of incoming mortar rounds. Sarah jolted awake in her bunk as the first explosion shook the entire base. The lights went out immediately, and emergency lighting cast an eerie red glow throughout the compound. Within seconds, she heard Lieutenant Colonel's voice over the base communication system, announcing they were under coordinated assault. Sarah's medical training kicked in automatically. She grabbed her medical bag and rushed toward the medical bay, dodging debris as more mortars impacted around the base perimeter. The sounds of automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple directions, indicating this was not a simple probe but a full-scale attack. Her heart raced, but her hands remained steady as she began preparing for mass casualties. The first wounded soldiers arrived within minutes. Corporal Davis stumbled in with shrapnel wounds across his left side, blood soaking through his uniform. Behind him, 2 soldiers carried Private Johnson, who had taken a bullet through his shoulder. Sarah immediately began triage, assessing injuries and prioritizing treatment. Her training took over completely, and the chaos outside seemed to fade as she focused on saving lives. More wounded kept arriving. The medical bay quickly filled beyond capacity, and Sarah found herself treating soldiers on stretchers lined up outside the building. She worked with incredible efficiency, stopping bleeding, stabilizing fractures, and administering pain medication. Sergeant appeared periodically to help move patients, his face grim as he reported that the attack was more organized and sustained than anything they had previously encountered. As dawn broke, Sarah could see the full scope of the assault. The enemy had surrounded the base with what appeared to be at least 60 fighters, using coordinated attacks from 3 directions. The perimeter defense was holding, but barely. Radio communications indicated that several observation posts had been overrun, and the enemy was attempting to breach the main gate with explosives. The medical bay became a constant stream of wounded soldiers. Sarah had never worked under such intense pressure, even during her emergency room rotations. She found herself making life-and-death decisions every few minutes, determining who could wait for treatment and who needed immediate attention. The weight of these choices pressed down on her, but she continued working with the same methodical precision that had always defined her medical practice. Around noon, Lieutenant Colonel appeared in the medical bay. His uniform was torn and dirty, and he moved with the urgency of someone fighting for survival. He quickly assessed the situation and told Sarah that they were running low on ammunition and that enemy fighters had broken through the outer perimeter in 2 locations. The base's defensive position was deteriorating rapidly. Explained that they had called for air support and reinforcements, but help was at least 4 hours away. He needed every available person who could handle a weapon to join the defensive effort. Sarah looked up from treating a soldier with severe burns and firmly reminded the commander that she was a medic, not a combatant. Her duty was to treat the wounded, not to fight. The commander's expression grew more serious as he explained that they might not survive the next few hours without everyone contributing to the defense. Sarah understood his desperation, but she maintained her position. She had wounded soldiers who depended on her medical skills, and abandoning them to pick up a rifle went against everything she believed about her role as a healer. As the afternoon progressed, the situation continued to deteriorate. Explosions grew closer to the medical bay, and Sarah could hear enemy voices shouting in the distance. She had treated over 30 wounded soldiers, some multiple times as they returned to the fight after receiving treatment. Her medical supplies were running dangerously low, and she was exhausting herself trying to keep up with the constant flow of casualties. Sergeant returned to the medical bay around 3 p.m. with a head wound that required immediate attention. As Sarah cleaned and bandaged his injury, he quietly told her that their defensive perimeter was collapsing. They had lost contact with several defensive positions, and enemy fighters were advancing toward the center of the base. He estimated they had maybe 2 hours before the medical bay itself came under direct attack. Sarah felt a chill of fear but continued her work. She trusted that the remaining soldiers would hold the line long enough for help to arrive. Her job was to keep treating the wounded and hope that her fellow soldiers could maintain their defensive positions. The idea of abandoning her medical duties still seemed unthinkable, even as the sounds of battle grew closer. The first enemy rounds to hit the medical bay came at 4:15 p.m. Bullets shattered windows and sent everyone inside scrambling for cover. Sarah found herself lying flat on the floor next to a wounded soldier, trying to shield him from the debris falling from the ceiling. The realization hit her suddenly that the medical bay was no longer a safe haven, but had become part of the battlefield. Despite the danger, Sarah continued treating patients while lying on the floor. She crawled from soldier to soldier, checking wounds and administering medication while enemy bullets whistled overhead. The wounded soldiers looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern, knowing that she was risking her life to provide medical care under impossible conditions. As evening approached, the attacks on the medical bay intensified. Sarah realized that several of her patients were too badly wounded to be moved to safer locations, even if such places existed on the base. She was faced with an impossible choice: abandon her patients to seek safety, or stay and risk being killed or captured along with the soldiers she was trying to save. The sound of enemy fighters shouting grew closer, and Sarah could hear them moving between buildings near the medical bay. She looked around at the wounded soldiers under her care and realized that her commitment to healing might require her to do something she had never imagined. Protecting her patients might mean more than just providing medical treatment. Lieutenant Colonel's voice crackled over the radio one final time before communications went dead. He announced that enemy fighters had breached the inner perimeter and that all personnel should prepare for close combat. Sarah looked down at her medical bag and then at the rifle that Sergeant had left propped against the wall. The moment she had never wanted to face was approaching rapidly. The first enemy fighter appeared in the doorway of the medical bay at 6:23 p.m. Sarah was crouched beside Private Martinez, applying pressure to a chest wound, when she looked up to see a figure silhouetted against the smoky orange sky. The fighter carried an assault rifle and moved with the confidence of someone who believed he had already won the battle. Time seemed to slow as Sarah processed what she was seeing. The wounded soldiers around her were helpless, some unconscious, others too badly injured to defend themselves. She could see the enemy fighter's eyes scanning the room, taking inventory of the vulnerable Americans lying on stretchers and makeshift beds. His finger moved toward the trigger of his weapon. Without thinking, Sarah dove toward Sergeant's rifle. Her hands closed around the weapon just as the enemy fighter raised his own gun toward the wounded soldiers. Every instinct screamed against what she was about to do, but a deeper instinct to protect her patients overrode her medical oath. She pulled the trigger 3 times in rapid succession. The enemy fighter collapsed immediately. Sarah stared in shock at what she had just done, the rifle trembling in her hands. Around her, the wounded soldiers who were conscious looked at her with expressions of gratitude and surprise. She had crossed a line she never thought she would cross, but seeing the relief in their eyes, she realized her choice had been the right one. More enemy voices echoed from outside the medical bay. Sarah's mind raced as she calculated their situation. They had several soldiers too wounded to fight, limited ammunition, and no way to call for help. The enemy fighters would likely return in greater numbers once they realized their comrade had been killed. She needed to think strategically about how to protect her patients. Sarah quickly assessed her resources. Besides rifle, there were 2 pistols belonging to wounded soldiers and approximately 6 magazines of ammunition. 3 of her patients could still handle weapons despite their injuries, while 4 others were completely helpless. She had medical supplies, but no real defensive equipment beyond what the wounded soldiers had carried with them. The next group of enemy fighters approached more cautiously. Sarah could hear them communicating outside, probably planning how to assault the medical bay without suffering additional casualties. She used this time to position her mobile patients in defensive positions while keeping the severely wounded in the safest area she could create toward the back of the bay. Corporal Davis, despite his shrapnel wounds, volunteered to help defend the medical bay. Sarah handed him one of the pistols, and they established fields of fire that would cover the main entrance and 2 windows. She felt strange giving tactical orders, but her medical training in crisis management helped her think clearly about organizing their limited resources. The second attack came 20 minutes later. 3 enemy fighters rushed the medical bay simultaneously, apparently hoping to overwhelm the defenders through speed and surprise. Sarah found herself firing her rifle while simultaneously directing Corporal Davis to cover the left window. The combination of medical leadership skills and desperate necessity created an odd but effective combat coordination. The firefight lasted less than 2 minutes, but it felt like hours to Sarah. When the smoke cleared, 2 more enemy fighters were dead, and the third had retreated with what appeared to be a leg wound. Corporal Davis had taken a bullet graze across his forearm, adding to his existing injuries, but remained capable of fighting. Sarah treated his new wound while keeping one eye on the perimeter. As darkness fell, Sarah realized that her role had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just a medic treating wounded soldiers. She had become the facto leader of a small defensive group trying to survive until help arrived. The wounded soldiers looked to her not just for medical care, but for tactical decisions about their survival. She established a rotation schedule that allowed the mobile patients to rest while maintaining constant watch for enemy activity. Using her medical knowledge, she calculated how long each wounded soldier could remain effective in combat before their injuries would incapacitate them completely. This information helped her plan their defensive strategy around realistic capabilities rather than wishful thinking. The enemy fighters regrouped and began a more systematic approach to eliminating the medical bay defenders. They cut power to the area and began using suppressive fire to pin down anyone inside the building. Sarah realized they were preparing for either a sustained siege or a final overwhelming assault designed to eliminate all witnesses to their attack on the base. Radio communications remained dead, leaving Sarah's group completely isolated from any remaining friendly forces on the base. She had no way of knowing whether other areas were still holding out or whether her group represented the last organized resistance. The uncertainty was almost worse than the direct combat, as it made planning for rescue or escape nearly impossible. During a quiet period around midnight, Sarah checked on each of her patients individually. Private Johnson's shoulder wound was becoming infected despite her treatment, and she was running low on antibiotics. 2 other soldiers were developing fever, indicating that their wounds might be more serious than initially assessed. She was facing a race against time to keep everyone alive until help arrived. The enemy fighters began psychological warfare around 2 a.m., shouting in broken English about what they planned to do to any Americans they captured alive. Sarah used medical gauze to muffle the sound for her patients, but she could see the fear in their eyes. She realized that surrender was not an option, both for military reasons and for the safety of the wounded soldiers under her protection. Sarah made the difficult decision to move 3 of her most severely wounded patients to a more secure area within the medical bay, even though this would limit her ability to defend the main entrance. She calculated that protecting them from capture was more important than maintaining optimal defensive positions. This choice forced her to think like a military commander rather than just a medic. As dawn of the second day approached, Sarah could hear enemy fighters moving equipment and supplies closer to the medical bay. They were clearly preparing for a major assault designed to finally eliminate this pocket of resistance. She checked her ammunition one final time and realized they had enough for maybe 10 more minutes of sustained combat. Looking around at the wounded soldiers who had trusted her with their lives, Sarah understood that her commitment to healing had led her to a place she never expected. Protecting her patients meant she would have to continue fighting, regardless of her personal beliefs about violence. The enemy was giving her no choice between healing and harming. They had made them the same thing. The final assault began at sunrise with a coordinated attack from 4 directions. Sarah could see at least 12 enemy fighters moving toward the medical bay, using covering fire and tactical movements that showed significant training and preparation. She realized this would be their last stand, and everything depended on the next few minutes. Sarah made quick assignments to her 3 mobile patients, positioning them to cover different approaches while she took responsibility for the main entrance. Her medical training helped her assess each soldier's physical capabilities and assign them roles that matched their current condition. Corporal Davis would cover the rear window despite his arm wound, while Private handled the left side despite his leg injury. The enemy fighters began their assault with a sustained barrage of automatic weapons fire designed to keep the defenders pinned down while assault teams moved closer. Sarah found herself thinking tactically about ammunition conservation and target priority, skills she had never learned in medical school, but seemed to develop naturally under extreme pressure. During a brief pause in the enemy fire, Sarah heard something that made her heart race with hope. In the distance, she could detect the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching the base. The rescue force was finally arriving, but she realized they would need to survive long enough for the helicopters to locate and assist them. Sarah shouted to her patients that help was coming, and she could see renewed determination in their eyes. However, the enemy fighters had apparently heard the helicopters too and began pressing their attack with increased urgency. They were clearly trying to eliminate the medical bay defenders before rescue forces could arrive and complicate their escape. The next 10 minutes became a blur of desperate combat. Sarah found herself moving between treating wounded soldiers and returning enemy fire, switching between her medical bag and rifle with a fluidity that would have shocked her just days earlier. She was simultaneously saving lives and taking them, fulfilling her commitment to healing through acts of violence. Private Johnson's shoulder wound reopened during the firefight, and Sarah had to treat him while bullets shattered the wall above their heads. She worked with one hand while keeping her rifle ready with the other, providing medical care under conditions that would have been impossible in any hospital setting. Her ability to multitask between healing and combat surprised even her. The helicopter sounds grew louder, and Sarah could hear different types of aircraft approaching. The rescue force appeared to include both transport helicopters and attack helicopters, suggesting a substantial response to their situation. However, the enemy fighters were not retreating and seemed determined to complete their mission before the air support could intervene effectively. Corporal Davis called out that he could see enemy fighters placing explosives near the medical bay's foundation. They were apparently planning to destroy the entire building rather than risk losing more fighters in direct assault. Sarah realized they had perhaps 2 minutes before the charges detonated, and moving the wounded soldiers would be almost impossible in that. Sarah made the most difficult command decision of her life. She ordered the 2 most mobile patients to take cover in a concrete drainage culvert behind the medical bay, while she remained with the soldiers too wounded to move. Private Johnson protested that they should all go together, but Sarah knew that some of her patients would die if moved in their current condition. The first explosion came sooner than expected, blowing out all the remaining windows and causing part of the roof to collapse. Sarah threw herself over Private Martinez to protect him from falling debris while somehow managing to keep her rifle pointed toward the main entrance. The medical bay was disintegrating around them, but she was determined to defend her patients until the last possible moment. Through the smoke and dust, Sarah could see enemy fighters entering the destroyed medical bay. She opened fire from her position on the floor, using overturned medical equipment as cover while trying to shield the wounded soldiers with her body. The combat was now happening at point-blank range, with enemy fighters literally stepping over injured Americans. Sarah's rifle emptied, and she switched to her pistol while continuing to provide cover for her patients. One enemy fighter appeared directly above her, raising his weapon toward the unconscious Private Martinez. Sarah shot him at close range and immediately rolled to cover another patient as more fighters entered the room. She was fighting for the lives of specific individuals rather than abstract military objectives. The sound of American voices shouting outside gave Sarah a surge of hope and energy. The rescue force had apparently reached their position, and she could hear intense firefights erupting around the medical bay. Enemy fighters began retreating through the holes blown in the walls, but several remained to continue the assault on the wounded soldiers. Sarah found herself in direct hand-to-hand combat with an enemy fighter who had run out of ammunition. Her medical training in human anatomy gave her unexpected advantages in close combat, as she understood exactly how to disable an opponent quickly and efficiently. The fight lasted only seconds, but it represented another fundamental change in how she viewed her capabilities. American soldiers burst through the main entrance of the medical bay just as Sarah was checking the pulse of the enemy fighter she had just killed. The rescue team immediately began securing the area and assessing casualties, while Sarah provided rapid medical briefings on each of her patients. She seamlessly transitioned back into her medical role while covered in dust and blood. The team medic who arrived with the rescue force stared in amazement at the medical bay. Despite the combat and explosions, Sarah had managed to keep all of her original patients alive, and most were in stable condition considering their injuries. Her ability to provide medical care while simultaneously defending against multiple enemy assaults was beyond anything he had seen in his military career. As additional medical personnel arrived and began evacuating the wounded, Sarah finally allowed herself to acknowledge what she had experienced. She had killed at least 6 enemy fighters while saving the lives of 8 wounded American soldiers. Her hands, which she had always believed were meant only to heal, had proven capable of both healing and harming when the situation demanded both. The rescue team leader, a major with extensive combat experience, told Sarah that her actions had gone far beyond normal medical duties. She had effectively commanded a small unit in combat while maintaining her medical responsibilities, demonstrating leadership capabilities that most officers took years to develop. He recommended her for both medical commendations and combat awards. Sarah looked around the destroyed medical bay one final time before being evacuated herself. Medical equipment was scattered and destroyed. Blood stained the walls and floor, and bullet holes marked every surface. Yet somehow, through the chaos and violence, she had fulfilled her commitment to healing by protecting those who could not protect themselves. Evacuation helicopter lifted off from the base as Sarah watched through a small window. Below them, the forward operating base Chapman was a smoking ruin, with destroyed buildings and equipment scattered across the compound. The attack had lasted nearly 18 hours, and the base was being abandoned as no longer defensible. Sarah felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness as they flew away from the place where everything had changed. During the flight to the larger medical facility, Sarah sat among the wounded soldiers she had protected. Private Martinez squeezed her hand and thanked her for saving his life, but Sarah found herself unable to respond with words. She was still processing the events of the past day and struggling to reconcile her actions with her beliefs about healing and violence. The debriefing process began immediately upon their arrival at the medical facility. Intelligence officers wanted detailed information about enemy tactics, numbers, and equipment, while medical personnel needed complete reports on injuries and treatment provided under combat conditions. Sarah found herself describing events that seemed unreal, as if they had happened to someone else. Major General Williams, the Regional Medical Command Officer, arrived to personally debrief Sarah. The general had reviewed preliminary reports and wanted to understand how a field medic had successfully commanded a defensive action while maintaining medical care for multiple casualties. Sarah struggled to explain decisions that had seemed obvious at the time, but appeared extraordinary in retrospect. The general explained that Sarah's actions represented a new model of military medical care under extreme conditions. Traditional medical training focused on providing care in relatively secure environments, but modern warfare increasingly placed medical personnel in direct combat situations. Sarah had demonstrated that medical skills and combat leadership could be combined effectively when necessary. Over the following days, Sarah learned the full scope of what had happened at the base. The enemy assault had involved over 80 fighters and had been planned for months. Most of the base personnel had been killed or captured, with only small groups like Sarah's surviving until rescue arrived. The medical bay had been specifically targeted because the enemy wanted to prevent treatment of wounded Americans. Sergeant Mike, who had survived his injuries, visited Sarah while she was recovering. He told her that her actions had saved not just the wounded in the medical bay, but had also provided crucial intelligence about enemy movements that helped the rescue force plan their assault. Her decision to fight had contributed to the larger military success beyond just protecting her immediate patients. The military awards ceremony took place 6 weeks later at a major base in Germany. Sarah received both the Bronze Star Medal for Valor in Combat and the Army Commendation Medal for exceptional medical care under fire. Standing at attention while the medals were pinned to her uniform, She thought about how far she had traveled from her original beliefs about healing and harming. During her speech at the ceremony, Sarah spoke about the difficult truth she had learned. Sometimes protecting life requires taking life, and sometimes healing means fighting. She acknowledged that this lesson challenged traditional medical ethics, but argued that military medics faced unique moral situations that required expanded thinking about their responsibilities to their patients. The speech generated significant discussion within military medical communities. Some medical personnel argued that Sarah's actions violated fundamental medical principles, while others saw her as representing an evolution in military medicine. The debate forced the military to examine training protocols and ethical guidelines for medical personnel in combat zones. Sarah returned to civilian practice 6 months later, taking a position in a trauma center in Houston. Her colleagues knew about her military service, but not about the specific events at the base. She found herself uniquely effective in emergency situations, with a calm confidence that came from having made life-and-death decisions under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. The nightmares came sporadically, usually featuring images of enemy fighters threatening her patients while she was unable to reach her rifle. Sarah sought counseling and discovered that many combat veterans struggled with similar conflicts between their actions and their values. The therapist helped her understand that moral complexity was often the price of survival in extreme situations. Private Martinez, who had fully recovered from his injuries, stayed in contact with Sarah. He had returned to active duty and often told other soldiers about the medic who had saved his life by picking up a rifle. His story spread through military medical communities, inspiring discussions about the expanded role of medical personnel in modern warfare. Sarah began speaking at military medical training centers, sharing her experiences with new medics and nurses preparing for deployment. She emphasized that their primary duty remained healing, but she also prepared them for situations where protecting their patients might require actions beyond traditional medical care. Her presentations were always emotional and often controversial. The transformation in Sarah's understanding of healing had profound effects on her civilian medical practice. She became known for her ability to remain calm during mass casualty events and for her skill in making rapid triage decisions. Colleagues noted that she seemed to have an intuitive understanding of human survival that went beyond standard medical training. 5 years after the attack, Sarah established a foundation that provided advanced combat medical training for military and civilian medical personnel. The program combined traditional medical skills with tactical awareness and decision-making under pressure. The goal was to prepare medical professionals for situations where healing and protection became inseparable responsibilities. During the Foundation's inaugural ceremony, Sarah reflected on her journey from an idealistic young medic who believed her hands were meant only to heal, to an experienced medical professional who understood that sometimes healing requires fighting. She had learned that true commitment to saving lives sometimes demanded actions that seemed to contradict the medical oath. The wounded soldiers from the medical bay attended the ceremony as honored guests. They represented the living proof that Sarah's controversial decisions had been correct. Looking at their faces, Sarah knew that her redefinition of healing had been worth every moral struggle and sleepless night. She had saved lives by being willing to take them when necessary. In her final speech of the evening, Sarah told the audience that she still believed medics were primarily healers, but she had learned that healing sometimes required courage to act beyond traditional boundaries. Her hands were indeed meant to heal, but they had also proven capable of fighting when that fight was necessary to protect the lives entrusted to her care. The Foundation's motto, inscribed on a plaque near the entrance, captured Sarah's transformed understanding. Healing through protection, protecting through courage, courage through commitment to those who depend on us. It represented a new philosophy of military medicine that acknowledged the complex realities of modern warfare while maintaining the fundamental commitment to preserving human life. Sarah's story spread throughout military and medical communities, challenging assumptions about the role of medical personnel in combat situations. She had proven that the ancient commitment to do no harm could be compatible with taking life when that action was necessary to prevent greater harm to those under medical protection. Her legacy changed how the military trained and equipped medical personnel for deployment in hostile environments.